Firstly, thank you so much to everyone who is here. I recognize you all have had a long day, but I will have a few demands from you all. One is that you be actively engaged in this conversation because it is critical. So in that spirit, I'm just going to ask you, how many of you all are comfortable talking about periods or menstrual hygiene? Bravo. How many of you all are not?
There's some men who lifted hands up. That's really impressive.
Thank you. Thank you for your honesty. The reason I wanted to ask this is because I want to set context, right? Specific to India. In India, only 12% of women have access to menstrual hygiene products. The rest of them are forced to use alternatives like cloth, ash, sand, plastic, dried leaves. Those are the alternatives women across India are being forced to use. This is the second leading cause for young girls to drop out of school after forced labor in India. India has one of the highest rates of cervical cancer rates, with a direct link to poor menstrual hygiene. And of course, then comes the loss to economy and all of these things. So the reason I say this is because I appreciate that you all are uncomfortable, but imagine what the women's bodies are going through who have to shove sand, plastic, dried leaves in their underwear to get through their day, because they can't help but bleed. So what I would ask from you is to lean in, be a little bit more engaged, get learnings from this conversation and be more of an active participant, if you may, because this is a really crucial subject that's affecting a lot of people across the world. So in that spirit, may I just ask you to just let me know that you all are wide and awake, and just give our amazing panelists another round of applause, because it truly takes a lot to come here and talk about a quote-unquote taboo subject. The reason why this topic is so dear to me, of course, is, we launched, when we first started talking about this subject, I'm a social activist. I run an NGO called SheSays. And when we realized, this is before GST came into the picture, that women were being taxed up to 12 to 14% on menstrual hygiene products, we just thought it was absurd. And we lobbied the government under the hashtag Lahu Ka Lagan. We launched the largest campaign globally on this issue. And after successfully lobbying the government, we managed to get them to remove the tax on sanitary napkin products. Sanitary napkin products are effectively tax-free across India now. Thank you. But it was through the help of stakeholders across, like men, women, gender non-binary people, LGBTQI forces. But we're still in court. And I will talk about that at the very end with regards to all of our, Let's Talk pledges. But in that spirit, I want to first start the question with you, Swarnima. Very often people like to talk about, I'm all for gender equality. But the second we start talking about inequality, that's when everyone gets uncomfortable and wants to shut up and wants to shut you up, right? So here I want you to talk about the inequality. I want you to talk about the hurdles. I want you to talk about the barriers that pose very real restrictions in making, ensuring women do not have guaranteed access to menstrual hygiene and sanitation, and ergo not have access to their basic human rights. So can you just tell us a little bit more about the barriers and how you are managing to overcome it through the work that you're doing? And also how you've seen women that you're working with overcome it in their day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Trisha. First of all, I'm so glad to be here among these really, really wonderful people. What I've seen in my journey as a social entrepreneur working in women's health is that people like progress, but they don't like change, as somebody says. Now, it's very true that people want gender inequality to go away, but the moment you ask uncomfortable questions, you bring uncomfortable facts, and you see that the people are complicit, in having these barriers up, that's where the discomfort begins. So in our work, what we've seen is that it's not just topics like menstruation or periods that is taboo, it's the female body itself. We are equally uncomfortable talking about menopause, abortion, hormonal illnesses like PCOS, endometriosis. Most of us, I can bet that people have not even heard of endometriosis, even though millions of women worldwide have it. We make fun of PMS. So it's the language is the first barrier. That we think that, women's health is just, okay, these 5 days of periods, use a product and get over it or something. But actually, it is a question that is, it's a daily experience. In India, 1 in 10 women have PCOS, which is also, related to discomfort during periods, but we don't talk about it. So the barrier begins with language, which is something we are all complicit in. The second barrier, starts with the way medical research is conducted. It's only in the 1990s and 2000s that the FDA and the National Institute of Health, they acknowledged that gender and sexual difference has to be a part, mandatorily be a part of scientific research. We still don't know the causes and cures for PCOS and endometriosis scientifically. So that is the level from which the access barrier begins. Women don't know what is the right question to even ask their gynecologist, forget about getting the right cure. Pain is so normalized in women's experience, whether it is menstruation, childbirth, or even if you go for waxing in a beauty parlor, a lot of times they say, why are you wincing in pain? Just suck it up. There is so much pain in store for you for the rest of your life. So this language of pain is ingrained in female experience, and we don't question it. That's why when women are facing a lot of period pain and period cramps, they don't think that, okay, this crosses a certain threshold, this could be the symptom of an underlying disorder or disease, and we should therefore see the doctor. So these are the various levels at which there is this barrier to access. And women are, in my experience, in my day-to-day work, I'm seeing that technology is becoming one of the various ways in which women are trying to, overcome this barrier. Facebook groups, other women's communities like ours and many others, where they are asking questions. They are asking precisely these questions that, is this normal that I have been bleeding way so much and it's been 8+ days? And we say, no, it's not normal. And we, connect them to experts. So women are now beginning to ask questions. And yes, many a time they don't have the familial structures and infrastructures that are helpful for them, but they are now seeking the right knowledge. And I think that is it's a big change. It sounds like a very small thing, but it's a huge change just as compared to the previous generation, to now. So I think that is a good start.
Thank you. Natalia, over to you. What I find really heartening about having you here, I know it says global supermodel and all of those things, but having had a conversation with you behind the scenes, having seen how you've been engaging with people, I just feel like humanitarian and someone who genuinely cares and walks the talk should be the prefixes used for you, because you're so much more than that, just based on the conversations that I'm having with you. What I want to ask you is, very often when we talk about menstrual hygiene and sanitation, people look at it from a lens of a very global south perspective, right? Poor country people, underdeveloped country people. You've managed to highlight this issue and specifically double down on European countries, ask them to do better in regards to making sure they provide women guaranteed access to menstrual hygiene. So my question to you is, when we launched our campaign, firstly, no one wanted to touch it, like especially Bollywood celebrities, no one wanted to touch it, the cause at all. They were like, we don't want to talk about period. So it's really interesting to me that your handle is Let's Talk. So we had to use humor. And we had to get comedians to go on Twitter and tag our finance minister and say, do you think I've taken a monthly subscription to bleed? Why are you charging me the tax? We had another actor being like, oh, I'm packing on my luxury trip. Here's my luxury shampoo. Here's my luxury deodorant. And here's my luxury sanitary napkin. Like, is this really a luxury? So we used humor as a vehicle to address this highly taboo subject. I'm curious to know, one, why did you feel a calling to talk about this issue and get other people to start talking about this issue? And two, how have you managed to use different mediums of communication to actually get people to have a global conversation about this issue? Because if you're not aware, she's leading an amazing global movement, getting multiple stakeholders on board that she will tell you about, on having very real transformative conversations. And when I say transformative, I mean it's not just superfluous conversations on social media, but making sure those conversations translate to on-ground change for women. So can you please tell us more about that?
Okay, thank you, Trisha, for this very generous introduction. I actually, for very rarely sitting in front of audience who are majority men. And I'll try to make what we are trying to relate to you a little bit more relevant, I hope. So imagine if you turn up at your office tomorrow, you go to the bathroom like we all do, and you find there's no soap and no toilet paper. What are you going to do? You're going to go back and to people who take care of this and say, excuse me, what is going on here? There's no toilet paper in the toilet. Nowhere, I checked in all the cabins. You'll be outraged, right? But when it comes to female hygienic products and female health in general, we have been so numb by the stigma and shame that we don't even question this anymore. We don't even, not men, but not even women. Even women don't bring this up. Even women do not ask, why do I not carry toilet paper and soap in my pocket, but why, when it comes to my needs, it's nowhere available. And indeed, it's treated like luxury. So this is something that maybe something that you can actually think about when you go back, and maybe one step that you can take very proactively. It's something that you can actually count and something that can bring change. Just try putting sanitary products in your company's bathrooms and see how women will respond. Or for one day, try to take that toilet paper out of all the men's bathrooms and see what kind of response you're going to get. I'm sure that, you know, CSR of every single company, it's so important today. If you're not thinking about your CSR, then you're not a company of the future. And we all want to create companies of the future. I'm giving you a very small, kind of very cheap solution to really make a huge change and huge difference to your female employees and raise a very interesting point with your male employees in moving this issue forward. The way we've been doing in addressing, the way we started addressing this at Let's Talk, we created, first of all, a social media campaign where we gathered CEOs, supermodels, chief editors-in-chief of big magazines, and we sat down, I personally sat down with them and talked to them about things that they'll never, ever will be talking about again. Not one journalist in the world will ask, well, when did you get your first period? Were you surprised? How was it? Did you have the conversation with your mother? Was your father aware? Did you tell him? And all these questions that we do not talk about to our friends, to our parents, to our husbands, to no one. And this is really all starts back at home and starts with us just feeling comfortable about talking about our health. And why, as Trisha pointed out, this is a global issue. Because no matter where you're a girl in the 6th grade in US, shy to go to a medical office to ask for a pad, or you're a girl here in India falling out of education completely, this conversation is a global issue. And actually, I didn't really even realize how crazy it is until I supported a campaign that was set up by Twinkle Khanna called Let's Talk About It, period, where everybody had to post selfie with a pad. So as a campaigner, international campaigner in the field, of course I wanted to support this, and I posted a selfie with a pad. You have no idea what this white, very clean piece of cotton provoked on my social media. I have millions, a couple of millions of followers, and I got thousands and thousands of comments of hate saying, you have teenagers following you, what kind of message are you sending? Literally, I was in shock. I was in shock because most of these comments were coming from women themselves. Women themselves it's taboo for them. They, even us women, we need to raise that standard of female health, and the stigma and shame is strong in us if we don't understand that nothing is wrong with menstrual blood even, and definitely nothing is wrong with a pad, a clean pad, and it sends a great topic for conversation and a great message. This is not a cigarette, this is not a bottle of vodka, this is not a gun. This is something that we women use every month to take care of ourselves. If I was there with a cotton pad, no one that would not provoke any conversation. So this is how I every day continue to be inspired to continue this conversation, and how Let's Talk came about.
I want to follow up on that in terms of like how did you continue in the face of harassment and trolling, because that ends up being a silencing tool for most. I want to come back to that. But first I want to get to you, Gaurav. You work a lot in the rural health space when it comes to women. And there are often very damaging narratives being put out there. So for example, when we moved to court, High Court, to make sure we filed a public interest litigation for not just to remove the tax on sanitary napkins, but to make sure women have guaranteed access. So we had multiple prayers. Surprisingly, one of the things very progressive Chief Justice and other people kept bringing up was, but do these rural women know about menstrual hygiene products? I think we should educate them. I think they're using these unsafe alternatives because they don't know better. We were like, no, there's statistics. 80% cannot afford them. No one will voluntarily shove sand because they don't know better. So I think there are these very damaging narratives that we put out there, especially when it comes to rural women, because we don't quite understand how progressive they are and how resilient they are in the face of adversity and having to, maximize resources. So I would love to get your inputs in terms of what are the biggest misconceptions that's out there, damaging misconceptions when it comes to health in perspective of rural women, and how are you, through the work that you're doing, trying to address that, not by giving them solutions, but by identifying what's working within that space and empowering them to take onus and agency and lead the change?
So I think from a perspective of the issues on the rural level, I mean, there are many, but I think the one I would highlight is a bit of personal. So actually the first time, as you said, I run a women entrepreneur network where we have women change makers at the village level who work on various SDGs, amongst them menstrual hygiene. So one of my first trips early when I moved and started this, I actually went into a village in Aurangabad, Maharashtra. So, and we were looking at menstrual hygiene, and I asked one of the ladies, actually was in a retail shop exploring, and one of the categories we were working on. And one boy walked in, and the boy who walked in basically came with a slip of paper and came to the shopkeeper and gave him this slip of paper. So then the shopkeeper handed over a sanitary napkin pack. I found it very interesting, like he wouldn't even know what a sanitary pad is, right? So I followed the boy back to his home, and basically I asked in the village, met the mother, and then started talking about this. And what came out was that she was not comfortable in actually going to the shop, because the shopkeeper was male, in asking for sanitary napkin, because that would mean people would know that she's in her period time. Secondly, the only thing she could think of, and she was doing this often, and so this is a user, right? So quite progressive that way. I don't think that is true anymore, but this is like 7 years back. So the interesting thing was that she was not comfortable in buying it, and didn't want anyone to know that she was buying a sanitary napkin. The second stigma which came out when I asked her was the disposal, right? So people are not comfortable disposing it. I mean, when she was using it, she was trying to dig it up somewhere. She didn't know what to do with it. So that's the two things. Affordability obviously is also another one. But the first two, it was so shocking for me that actually we started looking at how can we address this. So what we ended up doing is we have a network of women entrepreneurs. So by having a model where women sell to women, this whole stigma goes away. but it's obviously not a long-term solution, right? You have to get everyone to talk about it, but it's a start, because I think from a change perspective, the first level is get them to be comfortable to talk about it, build their confidence. So that's what we do with our women entrepreneurs. The second thing is to then get, once you have educated them, to get the family comfortable. And in village areas, it's very often joint families, so actually getting the mother-in-law, getting the other members of the family, to understand that this is very normal. There's no issue to talk about it, and it's a normal time for any woman. And the third thing we do is obviously look at the affordability. So I think that with the GST, obviously, congratulations on achieving that. I think there's a lot of things now which are models to address affordability. We're working on some of them, but I think it's much better than before. So I think these are the three things I would, to your question, I think, highlight from my rural experience.
Thank you. Swarnama, real quick to you. I know that you're doing a lot of work in terms of femtech to make sure women have access to, guaranteed health, menstrual hygiene. If you could just talk about that, but also then broad level, tell me about what do you think are the policy level changes we need when it comes to making sure women have guaranteed access to not just menstrual hygiene, but sexual and reproductive healthcare rights? Because as you all know, sex education is banned in India. And that's something I would implore upon you all to lobby and ask the government to do better. So in terms of policy level change, what would you think? Again, I think all of us, in terms of voices of civil society, obviously can do, but there's responsibilities that the government has to us as citizens. So I want you to bridge the gap between the two. Tell me about your work, and also from a policy perspective, what are the changes we can ask and demand for menstrual hygiene as well as sexual and reproductive healthcare rights?
So I think I'll start with the policy first and then tell you, how, what have our learnings been. The first thing I was about to say is exactly this, sexual and sexuality education in schools. Now, there's a reason for this. As I said in the beginning, that it's not just topics like menstruation that are stigmatized. It is the female body and sexual organs itself, For instance, we're talking about the Delhi pollution, and we're talking about how it's affecting our lungs and everything. Think for a moment how it's also affecting the uterus, for instance, and it is. We don't talk about visibilizing or destigmatizing the uterus. We know so much about, our lungs and kidneys, but can I dare anybody to label a uterus the way it should be? So I think that is the first thing, that when we start talking about the body in a very rights-based manner and not in a, from a strange sort of attitude, that is the first step. That's when we start asking the right questions. The second policy change that we really need to talk about ties up with what Gaurav said about disposal of sanitary napkins and other period products in the rural areas. A lot of people, these are the stories that come to us sometimes, that for instance they are using these low quality, cheap, subsidized pads many times, which are very cheap. They are like 1 rupee, 2 rupees or something. But first of all, they're very small. Then they are not of a very good quality. And it's not just about giving them any product. It's about also the dignity of the people. So just because, we are talking about sanitary napkins does not mean that, give something and after like a couple of hours, the top layer comes off and it's just very, people don't want to use that, Women, we underestimate that women don't know their health and rights that well. They know their rights very well. They want better products if only they are more affordable. So not just affordability, but also the good quality products. We have to see to it that there is no classism in the way we are allocating products to certain classes of society. And education, of course. The third thing is a little more to do with the organized sector of work and, the urban spaces. Not just menstrual leaves, because that's, there are barriers to it, but making menstruation and women's health mainstream in workplace conversations. So it is not as reductive as, okay, give them a menstrual leave. It's not a sickness, we have to talk about how period inclusion can be done at the workplace and how chronic illnesses such as PCOS and endometriosis or non-chronic but serious issues like postpartum depression can be included in the workplace conversation, because that does impact workplace participation as well. So in terms of policy changes, these are three things I think are very important. Now, my organization works with Femtech, which is basically technology for women's health. And I think it is a very important thing because, people generally think, okay, Femtech is just about, these period tracking apps and stuff like that, but that's not the case. Femtech is basically a technological perspective on women's health and introducing women's health in technology, which so far was not the case. I'll give you a small example of what we do. We make, uterus toys which use augmented reality and other interactive technologies in a gamified manner to teach women about their health and bodies. And that really recasts the uterus as something powerful and creative and thriving rather than something to be hidden away or be ashamed of. Similarly, there's another company in the US which what it does is it diagnoses PCOS and endometriosis through menstrual blood, which recasts, menstrual blood as just something to be disposed of, but as something which is a resource about your health and body. So I think these are the kind of attitudes we need. Technology is definitely an enabler, a means to an end, and putting women's narratives and women's health narratives in technological infrastructural frameworks is the way to go.
I love that you said women's bodies should be looked at from a rights-based perspective. Coming back to you, Natalia, it's really interesting. Very often when women exercise their agency and talk about issues, they're first silenced. And I think it's surprising that, not surprising, but it's unfortunate that women themselves internalize patriarchy and ask you to, shut up, don't talk about these taboo subjects. But it yet catalyzed you to start a movement saying, let's talk. So I'm interested to know a twofold question. One is, after you started this whole movement of Let's Talk, you've been bringing influencers, stakeholders from different spaces to come and talk about menstrual hygiene, sanitation. What have you noticed the barrier to be, or the challenge to be, maybe a surprising challenge in the field that you didn't really account for? Is there something like that you noticed? And the second question, from a personal perspective, what I want to ask you is, what has your barrier been when it comes to, speaking up affirmatively and, demanding for human rights? I'm sure people look at you from a label of a model, right? And that in itself, not to in any way diminish the space, it's an amazing space and industry. But my point is, what has the challenges and barriers been for you trying to navigate through these spaces and address very real taboo subjects and also advocate for human rights?
Well, to answer first of your question around Let's Talk, what's the barrier maybe? I think that it's often conversation that is held within the room that inspires people in the room, but it's a kind of conversation that is very difficult to translate into a viral space. And this is, I think the solution there would be more to go to pop culture and to try to activate voices of the change makers that are inspiring the young generation. I would say that the equivalent here is Bollywood. So I don't know. I know that I don't know exactly what, but I know that there have been a lot of actors involved in talking about these difficult subjects, and I think that's paramount. And I've experienced that myself, and that's why I brought on board women that have very, very large followership, because that is something that's really effective. That's why it's really important to bring on board women that are going to speak to millions of young girls and also boys. And men as well. It's really important to bring men on board. Another mention that's been really effective is indeed technology. So we work with is an app called Flow, and it's the largest female health platform in the world today. And actually, they have technology that diagnoses endometriosis and a lot of menstrual-related complications and conditions through their technology, through artificial intelligence. So you don't even have to go through this very difficult process of collecting your menstrual blood and sending it somewhere. So it's also an incredible to see the conversations that are happening inside the app. We are yet to create a product for men, although I think that should be a very interesting product to have for men to know when their wife is on a period. It's something that would, I think, also, so a lot of women just uncomfortable to say to their husbands, you know, I have my period. But actually it might explain something that, you know, she may not want to go for romantic dinner in a restaurant, or she may feel tired and you don't, or moody, you know, that does happen, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's just the hormones are like that, and they play on our body, and this is something that's to take lightly, really. My husband certainly does, and I'm grateful that when I come down in the morning and he sees my face kind of, and I don't want to talk, he always says, "Uh-oh, we have to be nice to mommy today," I think. And I'm grateful, and I think that, well, he knows me now, we've been together for a very long time, but I think that a lot of young men do not understand their wives, and of course the stigma and shame all over the world. I'm not talking about India, but the wives afraid. They don't know how to. The language is not created of how to easily talk about it. So please give your feedback if you think that that's product would be interesting for Flow to develop. A little kind of a push notification to men that, you know, your wife is on her period and you better send her flowers.
I know in the interest of time we have to wrap up, but before we do, I just want to quickly throw a last question in terms of what's your Let's Talk pledge? I know you had pledges that you all want to throw in, so just Gaurav, just really brief, succinct, what's a Let's Talk pledge or a Let's Act pledge that you're going to throw out there to the audience to encourage everyone in the room to make their own pledges on this very important topic?
So for me, it's 5 million girls reached in the next 2 years.
It's brilliant.
In villages in India.
Fantastic.
Thank you for being a great male ally on this subject.
For me, since the topic is Let's Talk, my pledge is to really talk to all the people in my family. I feel the families are the final bastions of traditional and sometimes regressive ideas. And my pledge is to talk and also give other women the means and the language and the tools to talk to their families and have these very difficult conversations, so that a push notification doesn't have to replace, you know, like an actual conversation between family members.
Natalia, over to you.
Well, it's been very inspiring to talk to a room with men as a majority, and I pledge to find more ways to reach out to male community. I am a mother of 4 boys and 1 girl only, so boys are definitely outnumbered in my family. So I'll pay more attention to the male audience when it comes to elevating the standard in female health.
And as is, we're still in court. We're fighting to make sure women have guaranteed access to menstrual hygiene. So root for our public interest litigation. And in that spirit, thank you all so much for being an actively engaged audience. And I implore upon you all to also make active commitments to address and take on this very real subject heads on. Thank you so much to all of the participants. You all have been really generous with your honesty.
Thank you so much indeed to all of our panelists. Real conversations, real talk over there. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to request all of you to please come together for a group photograph, a quick group photograph, all of you.